They said Iran would break, that it would collapse under sanctions, pressure, and isolation. They believed fear would silence it, that missiles would crush its will, that a nation standing alone couldn't stand for long. But what the world witnessed, no one expected. This isn't just Iran's story, it's the story of a spirit that doesn't bend, that doesn't break, that doesn't run from pressure but rises through it. It's the story of a people who looked the world in the eye and said, "We will not kneel. We will not disappear." If you believe one nation can't stand up to global power, stay till the end of this video, because what you're about to hear just might change the way you see everything. They came with power, with weapons, with plans drawn in boardrooms and war rooms, thinking they could break a country with force. They thought this was about borders and oil, politics and alliances. But they didn't understand what they were truly up against. They weren't fighting a government. They were challenging a soul, a legacy, a spirit forged through centuries of resistance, survival, and sacrifice. What stood before them wasn't just a nation. It was an idea that cannot be erased. Iran's defiance wasn't born yesterday. It's been in the soil, in the blood, in the echo of every voice that ever said, "We will not kneel." They didn't come for compromise. They came with arrogance, expecting submission. But what they found was something they couldn't destroy: dignity. This wasn't a battle between armies, it was a battle between courage and control. And courage doesn't need tanks. It doesn't beg for mercy, it doesn't crack under pressure. Courage, real courage, lives in the hearts of mothers who bury their sons with tears and pride. It lives in the workers who build with their bare hands. Even when the world blocks their trade, it lives in the prayers whispered before dawn, in the chants that echo in the streets, in the silence of a people who would rather suffer than surrender their truth. The ones who came to break Iran thought that if they shook the system, the people would fall. But what they didn't realize is that the system wasn't what held the people together. It was the spirit that did. You can't bomb a belief. You can't sanction a soul. You can't erase a people's memory with propaganda. When you come after a nation like that, you find yourself face to face with something deeper than politics. You meet resistance that doesn't back down, not because they don't feel fear, but because they choose honor over ease. They choose legacy over silence. And in that choice lies the power no superpower can match. They came to conquer a place, but what they triggered was a fire that spread beyond borders. They didn't break Iran, they awakened it. They reminded the world that there are still people who won't sell their dignity for comfort, who won't be bribed into submission, and who won't forget who they are, even when the world demands they do. That spirit isn't measured in statistics or polls. It's measured in the way a nation stands when the world wants it on its knees. And Iran stood tall. They thought sanctions would be the silent weapon, the kind that doesn't drop bombs but leaves a country breathless all the same. They hit Iran's economy from every direction, shutting doors, freezing assets, isolating its people from global trade and opportunity. The goal wasn't just to pressure. It was to crush, to suffocate hope. They expected the streets to empty, the people to turn on each other, and the spirit of the nation to crumble beneath the weight of poverty and despair. But what happened was the opposite. Because when you try to starve a people who have tasted sacrifice for generations, they don't fold, they adapt. Iran didn't just endure the sanctions, it learned how to grow through them. Innovation replaced dependency. Local hands built what the world refused to sell. And while the outside world mocked their hardship, inside the country, resilience was being born in silence. The cost was real. Medicine became scarce. Inflation rose. Life got harder. But the will didn't bend. In fact, the pressure only deepened the people's connection to one another and to the idea that their dignity would not be for sale. While the world measured strength in dollars and exports, Iran redefined it through self-reliance and patience. Those who tried to break it thought the economy was the engine of the nation. But the real engine was its belief system, its history, and its faith in standing tall through storms. What they fail to understand is that a nation raised on the memory of war, of revolution, of struggle, knows how to endure suffering, and in enduring, they grow stronger. Sanctions were designed to be silent killers, but instead they reveal something loud and unshakable. The unbreakable resolve of a people who will not be dictated to. Every attempt to isolate Iran became a reason for it to build inward, to trust in its own hands, and to remind the world that courage cannot be embargoed. They tried to shrink Iran's presence. But Iran's answer wasn't desperation. It was defiant, not through noise, but through quiet strength. Not through revenge, but through resistance. When the world thought Iran would collapse under pressure, Iran taught the world a lesson in survival. They thought martyrdom would weaken Iran, that by targeting leaders, generals, commanders, by striking hearts at the top, they would create fear, confusion, collapse. They believed if they took the head, the body would scatter. But what they never understood is that in Iran, martyrdom is not the end. It is a beginning. Every time a soul falls in defense of dignity, of land, of belief, it does not silence a people, it awakens them. It does not remove a symbol, it multiplies it. In Iran, when a man is martyred, 1,000 more rise in his place. Not because they were trained, but because they were inspired. Because courage, once witnessed, becomes contagious. The blood of martyrs in Iran is not mourned in despair, it is honored in strength. Their pictures hang not as reminders of loss, but as banners of sacrifice. Children grow up repeating their names, knowing their stories, walking their paths. Their memory becomes a compass for generations. When a commander like Qasem Soleimani was taken, the world expected chaos, but what followed was unity. Millions poured into the streets not to protest, but to proclaim, "We are not afraid." That kind of power cannot be created by governments. It is born only when a people believe so deeply in what they stand for, they are willing to die for it. And more importantly, to live with the responsibility of carrying that legacy forward. Martyrdom in Iran is not accidental, it is intentional. It is part of the DNA of resistance. Those who fall are not forgotten because they represent more than themselves. They are reminders that freedom comes at a cost, and that cost is one Iran has never shied away from paying. The enemy thinks removing a leader will remove momentum, but in reality, the loss becomes the very fuel that drives a deeper movement. Pain does not paralyze, it mobilizes. Mourning does not weaken, it reorganizes. What the world doesn't see is what happens after the funeral, after the flags, after the chants, what happens in homes, in mosques, in schools. Young men decide to pick up where the martyrs left off. They study harder, train harder, pray harder, serve harder, because in Iran, martyrdom is not the end of leadership. It's the beginning of 1,000 new missions. You can kill a body, but you cannot kill an idea once it's been lit by the fire of sacrifice. This is why every bullet, every drone, every airstrike meant to silence Iran ends up speaking louder than ever before. Because the ones who fall don't fall alone. They rise through the voices of millions who will never forget what they stood for. That is not defeat. That is the loudest kind of victory. Courage isn't measured by how many missiles you have, how large your army is, or how much economic power you hold. Courage is measured by how you stand when everything around you is meant to break you. Iran was never the biggest, never the richest, never the most advanced by Western standards, but it stood when others bowed. It spoke when others went silent. It held its ground when the pressure from the world became unbearable. That's the kind of courage that doesn't come from politics. It comes from principle. It comes from remembering who you are and refusing to let fear decide your future. When nations were told to choose between submission and survival, Iran chose neither. It chose resistance, not recklessly, but righteously. That kind of courage terrifies those who depend on dominance, because they cannot understand a people who value dignity more than comfort. Iran has been tested repeatedly, provoked with sanctions, threats, assassinations, isolation, and yet it never caved. It never begged. It recalibrated. It endured. It rose again and again, not by matching the enemy's strength, but by showing a different kind of power, the power to stand alone. In a world built on alliances and fear of consequence, Iran has consistently made choices not based on what's easy, but on what's right. Whether the world agreed or not, Iran's stand was not shaped by applause. It was shaped by legacy, by a history of revolution, of sovereignty, of never accepting humiliation. And when you live with that history in your blood, courage is not an option, it's a responsibility. The global stage is full of nations with vast resources, huge militaries, and powerful friends, but many of them lack backbone. They bow when pressured, retreat when threatened, and compromise when challenged. Iran, with all odds against it, remained rooted. Because courage isn't about volume, it's about value. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice, what line you won't cross, and how long you're willing to hold your position when the storm hits. Iran has shown that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to walk forward despite it, to continue speaking when your voice is targeted, to continue building when your hands are tied, to continue resisting when surrender would be the easier road. This is why the world watches Iran differently, not because of its size, but because of its stance. In a world that rewards silence and obedience, Iran chose defiance and dignity. And that kind of courage sends ripples beyond borders. It inspires the oppressed, challenges the powerful, and forces the world to recognize that some nations may be pressured, punished, or isolated, but they will never be owned. Iran's courage did not come from conquest. It came from conviction. And that's the kind of power no missile can match. When Iran stood up and struck back, the world didn't just witness a military response. It witnessed a moment that echoed through the global order. It wasn't simply about missiles or targets. It was about a nation drawing a line in the sand and declaring, "You will not walk over us without consequence." The strike wasn't loud because of the noise it made. It was loud because of what it meant. In a time when many nations buckle under pressure or hide behind diplomatic language, Iran's response was clear, direct, and unapologetic. It disrupted narratives. It made even the most powerful nations pause. For once, the world had to stop and acknowledge that this was not a country that would take a blow in silence. It reminded everyone watching, whether in support or opposition, that Iran was not afraid to defend its dignity. The impact wasn't just military, it was psychological. The idea that a nation long portrayed as weak, isolated, and on the defensive could respond with such precision and resolve shook many. It forced a new kind of respect. Not the kind built on alliances or handshakes, but the kind built on consequence. People around the world took notice. It didn't matter what side they were on. What mattered was that they saw a country standing tall when it was expected to kneel. In every corner of the globe, oppressed nations, occupied people, voices silenced by fear, they watched, and for a moment they saw possibility. They saw that resistance could still roar, that sovereignty wasn't a fantasy, that courage still had a pulse in a world of calculated silence. This was not about pride, it was about principle. Iran didn't strike for chaos, it struck with clarity. It struck to remind those who attacked it that its blood would not be spilled without a response. The message was simple. We are not a punching bag for your politics. We are not a weak point on your map. We are a people who have known struggle for generations, and we do not fear it. The world watched, and many were shocked. not just by the action, but by the control, the precision, the discipline. Because it wasn't reckless, it was measured. And that's what made it powerful. It didn't come from desperation, it came from deep-rooted resolve. Even those who disagreed with Iran politically had to admit there is strength here. There is unity in crisis. There is a code that runs deeper than politics. And in that moment, Iran forced the world to recognize it not as a problem, but as a presence. It proved that the voice of a sovereign nation can still echo through the halls of power, even when every effort has been made to silence it. That echo, that impact, didn't end when the missiles landed. It began there, and its aftershocks are still being felt around the world. You can't break a nation that has already given everything for its belief, because such a nation doesn't measure its strength in what it owns. It measures it in what it's willing to sacrifice. That is the heart of Iran's defiance. Its foundation is not built on luxury, it lives in the hearts of those who've lost everything and still choose to keep fighting for what's right. This wasn't just a moment in history. It was a message to the world that dignity still has defenders, that sacrifice still holds value, and that you cannot destroy a people who have already decided. We would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. They came to break Iran, but instead, Iran broke the silence. It shook the narrative. It reminded the world what resistance really looks like. Allah, a thank you message. Thank you for walking through this truth with me. If you're someone who believes in justice, dignity, and standing tall in a world that wants you to shrink, then carry this message forward. Speak it, share it, live it. Because courage is not just for one nation, it's for every soul that refuses to be broken. May you always find strength in your struggles, purpose in your pain, and faith in the fire. Good luck in your journey, and may you always stand firm in the face of the storm. Thank you for listening. Struggle is not in vain. It deepens their conviction that they are on a path of resistance, not for temporary gains, but for generational dignity. This mindset is rooted in history. From the memory of colonial interference to the scars of imposed war, Iranians have learned that the price of freedom is not cheap, and they are still willing to pay it. The outside world sees images of protest and assumes weakness. They see shortages and assume failure. But what they often miss is the unshakable belief that runs beneath the surface. A belief that says, we would rather suffer standing up than live comfortably on our knees. That belief is what has carried Iran through every attempt to destabilize it. It's not just the people in power who resist. It's the people in the streets, the farmers, the teachers, the students, the families, the everyday sacrifice, the quiet pride, the patience that refuses to be bought. What terrifies powerful nations the most is not Iran's weapons, but its worldview, a worldview that rejects domination, that insists or dependency, but on a collective spirit that has endured revolution, war, sanctions, and international isolation, yet still stands firm. When a people are willing to lose everything, comfort, economy, reputation, even their lives, for a principle, then there is nothing left for their enemies to take. That kind of commitment terrifies those who rely on fear to control others. Because how do you threaten someone who has already accepted the cost of standing for what they believe in? Iran's story is not about invincibility. It's about endurance. This is a nation that has been tested by fire, and each time the flames rose, it emerged more determined. That's because the people do not place their identity in worldly power, but in spiritual and cultural resilience. Their sacrifices are not seen as losses, but as necessary offerings to protect their sovereignty and truth. Every blockade, every sanction, every assassination attempt only fuels the sense that their